Part 47. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 461. Bang, bang, bang. Accompanied by sparks from the bullets hitting the protective shield. Sun Hao's face suddenly darkened, and his hand pulled the trigger again with a light click. The pistol was out of bullets. Sun Hao was startled. He looked at the pistol in his hand. He slowly threw the pistol aside, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "Stealth technology and invisible bulletproof vest technology. I didn't expect that there are national technologies in SpecialAbilities that can research such high-tech weapons." He still thought that it was researched by the country in SpecialAbilities. Chen Tao's eyebrows slightly relaxed, and he said, "You are really a staunch atheist. If other people saw this, they would have thought I was a god." Sun Hao looked at Chen Tao. "There is no god in this world." Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, "I will not talk to you about whether there is a god in this world. The purpose of my coming here is very simple. I want you not to use nuclear bombs." Sun Hao frowned. "I don't like to use nuclear bombs, but if someone threatens the safety of our country, then as the leader of the country, I can only rely on the deterrence of nuclear bombs. Now the West has used several nuclear bombs to bomb Tinger Island, and I have killed and injured tens of millions of innocent people. Now I don't know what terrible actions the West will take. As the leader of the country, I can only fight back and let the Western country know the pain and the price of using nuclear bombs against our country." He looked at Chen Tao seriously. "Our country has a nuclear bomb system called the destruction system. When the leader of the country dies due to an accident, the technology will be activated and it will be determined that another country has assassinated me. At that time, all our nuclear bombs will be launched, and the system's target is the countries of the world. With the number of nuclear bombs our country has, the entire SpecialAbilities will be wiped out. You have special technology. I can't do anything to you. You can also kill me, but you and the country behind you will die." He stared at Chen Tao with a serious look, and it didn't look like he was joking at all. Chen Tao crossed his arms. "Interesting. So if you accidentally drive outside and have an accident, the entire SpecialAbilities will be buried with you." Sun Hao's statement is completely unreasonable. It is not difficult to understand that Sun Hao is now intimidating Chen Tao. Although Sun Hao looks like he is not afraid of death, he has thought of this lie and wants to use it to scare Chen Tao so that Chen Tao dare not take action. However, Chen Tao saw through it at a glance, and continued, "Besides, there should be no nuclear bombs in your country, right?" Sun Hao was stunned. His face changed slightly. "How do you know? Could it be, you did it?" Hearing this, Chen Tao slightly stretched his eyebrows. "You are right about this, I did it." Sun Hao frowned suddenly. "You have the technology of stealth, yes, who else can do this except you? Since you already know that our country's nuclear bombs are gone, why did you come to me to talk about this?" Sun Hao looked at Chen Tao. "Knowing that our country's nuclear bombs are gone, you still ask us not to use nuclear bombs." Chen Tao said lightly, "I can take away your country's nuclear bombs, but I can't stop your country from continuing to develop them, so I made this request." Sun Hao closed his eyes. He took a breath, then looked at Chen Tao and said, "What if I say no?" Chen Tao looked at the tall, thin, and handsome man in front of him, and said, "Then I will kill you and change the leader of your fire country." The two looked at each other. Sun Hao stared at Chen Tao without any deviation. Chen Tao didn't care. Sun Hao closed his eyes and said, "Okay, I can promise you, but I have conditions." Sun Hao stared at Chen Tao and said, "If the West uses nuclear bombs against my country again, then my country will not be at the mercy of others. If you can promise me not to let the West use nuclear bombs, my country will naturally not use them." Chen Tao said, "Okay." Upon hearing this, Sun Hao's eyes lit up slightly, and he said, "It's a deal." "It's a deal." Chen Tao looked at Sun Hao. Sun Hao said, then I can promise you that I will never use the nuclear bombs developed later. Well. Chen Tao retracted his gaze and looked at Li Xiaolu beside him. Li Xiaolu's pretty little face was filled with a happy smile. The nuclear bomb crisis of this civilization has been resolved, and this civilization will not be destroyed by nuclear bombs. The reason why Chen Tao tried to stop it was because of Li Xiaolu. If Li Xiaolu hadn't discovered it and then looked for Chen Tao, this civilization would have turned into a sea of fire after a while. As the first contributor to saving this civilization, Li Xiaolu was very happy. Looking at Li Xiaolu's smile, Chen Tao raised his hand, gently stroked Li Xiaolu's hair, and said, "Let's go, we're done here, let's go back." Li Xiaolu hummed. With Li Xiaolu's words, the figures of the two disappeared on the spot. Looking at the place where Chen Tao and Li Xiaolu disappeared, Sun Hao was slightly startled. He looked at the door and then at the closed French window. His eyebrows frowned slightly. Time passed bit by bit. Sun Hao frowned even deeper, and he said, "Is it not invisible? If it was just invisible, they would have to open the door or go through the window if they wanted to leave. And there would be movement when moving. But there was no movement. It's not invisibility, could it be teleportation?" Sun Hao's eyes trembled slightly, and he said, "God, are they gods?" "Impossible." Sun Hao immediately denied himself, "Impossible, there can't be gods." Sun Hao shook his head and sat down at his desk, but his heartbeat quickened and his face turned pale. As the leader of the Fire Nation, Sun Hao always thought that his country's technology was strong enough, but today he encountered a more powerful existence. In an instant, the nuclear bombs of the entire country were gone. This move was too weird. If that person was not trying to persuade him not to use nuclear bombs, but to use them to control the world, wouldn't it be easy for him to control the world? It was unimaginable that there would be such an existence on this Xia star. Sun Hao closed his eyes and fell into deep thought. On the other side, Chen Tao and Li Xiaolu returned to the bedroom. Chen Tao walked to the bed and sat down. He looked at Li Xiaolu who was standing in front of him. He smiled and said, "Are you happy?" Li Xiaolu hummed. She walked to Chen Tao and took the initiative to lean on him. Sitting in Chen Tao's arms, she raised her pretty face, looked at Chen Tao, smiled and said, "Thank you." Chen Tao was slightly startled. He looked at Li Xiaolu, "Thank you." He showed a naughty smile, put his arm around Li Xiaolu's waist, turned over, and put her on the bed. He looked into her big eyes and smiled and said, "Thank you at the right time." Li Xiaolu's face flushed. She pursed her thin lips, slightly turned her face, and her long eyelashes flickered. "Xiaolu will give you whatever you want." Chen Tao smiled. "So good. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 462. 2 hours later. Chen Tao was lying on the bed comfortably. He looked at Li Xiaolu beside him. Li Xiaolu has fallen asleep, sleeping so soundly, with a slight smile on her delicate little face. He just looked a little tired. Li Xiaolu is different from Chen Tao's other women. Ziqing and Lin are already mature young women. Betty has always been like a little Lolita who has not grown up, and Li Xiaolu is a young girl. She is tall and slender, and her originally long, ink-like hair was cut short at some point, with bangs. Under the bangs is her charming little face, which looks particularly cute. Her figure is not as exaggerated as Ziqing or Rose, nor is she as petite and cute as Betty, but she has a unique beauty, a delicate beauty. Chen Tao raised his hand and gently touched her cheek. Perhaps sensing Chen Tao's movements, she moved her body, her eyelashes moved, and she slowly opened her eyes. Eye to eye with Chen Tao. Chen Tao smiled, and through Li Xiaolu's eyes, he saw a hint of laziness and fatigue. When Chen Tao saw Chen Tao, Li Xiaolu's eyes lit up slightly, and there was a smile on her face. She slowly hid her little face in Chen Tao's arms, husband. Listening to Li Xiaolu say this title intimately, Chen Tao's mind wandered, and there was a smile on his face. He smiled, I remember you didn't call me that. Now you call me that, are you implying something? No, there is no hint. Li Xiaolu's face turned red. Looking at Li Xiaolu's cute expression, Chen Tao smiled, stroked her hair, and said, I didn't have time to ask just now, why did you cut your hair? Li Xiaolu was startled. She raised her face and looked at Chen Tao uneasily, and said, don't you like it? Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled, of course not. I like your hair no matter what it looks like, even if it's bald. Well, I don't want it. I don't want to be bald. That's too scary, Li Xiaolu said reluctantly. Chen Tao smiled, well, don't be bald. Your short hair is very cute now, and I quite like it. I just want to ask. Indeed, although Li Xiaolu has short hair, she is still very cute. Matching her appearance and figure, this sweet short hair complements her even more. It's nothing, I just want to change my hairstyle, Li Xiaolu said with a blushing face. My friends at school said that my head shape is suitable for short hair, and it will look better if I cut it into short hair, and the man I love will like it more, I just cut it. Chen Tao smiled, the man I love, do you mean me? Li Xiaolu blushed and hid her face in Chen Tao's arms. She nodded gently, looking very shy. Seeing Li Xiaolu's little reaction, Chen Tao was happy. She's so cute and doesn't hide her feelings at all. Chen Tao said softly in her ear, actually, no matter how your hair looks, I like it. She responded softly. Chen Tao smiled softly and said, however, your classmate is indeed right. This is quite cute. This was what Li Xiaolu wanted to hear most after she had her hair cut short. She had a smile on her face. Chen Tao said, I have a lot of love for you. What I want to do most now is to turn this love into the crystallization of your relationship with me. Li Xiaolu didn't understand. She raised her face and looked at Chen Tao, what is that? Chen Tao smiled, child. Li Xiaolu was startled for a moment. She regained consciousness. She turned red. She hid her body in Chen Tao's arms and said, don't, I'm not mentally prepared. There are people who are still in school. Hearing this, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly, he smiled, kissed her forehead, and said, it's okay. You can get pregnant first. Let's talk about school slowly. Li Xiaolu's eyes trembled slightly and were shiny. She didn't speak, but her face was red. This is the default. Seeing this, Chen Tao smiled, held her chin with his hand, raised her face, and kissed her. Time passes day after day. This day, Chen Tao was sleeping. Halfway through his sleep, a voice sounded in Chen Tao's mind. Dear came a familiar voice. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao opened his eyes. This voice is very familiar. Isn't it Rose's voice? What's wrong? Chen Tao replied. Well, someone just challenged me, and then I accidentally used too much force, and she was about to die. This person seems to have met you. I don't know whether I should let her die or what to do. Rose, the charming voice sounded slowly and unhurriedly. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao blinked. He sat up, touched his messy hair, got out of bed, and said, Who? The wind in Yongxiao star is Xiao Xiao, she seems to be dying. Rose's voice sounded. Chen Tao was startled when he heard this voice. The wind is rustling. Chen Tao thought she had left, but she is still here? That woman came to challenge Chen Tao. After being defeated by Chen Tao before, she was determined to defeat Chen Tao, but Chen Tao didn't expect that she actually ran to challenge Rose. That woman had nothing to do with Chen Tao, and her death seemed to have no impact on Chen Tao. However, Chen Tao had met her once before and had a few angry words with her. The most important thing is that she is a woman. Chen Tao's machismo is at work. He got off the bed and disappeared. When he appeared again, Chen Tao appeared on a deserted planet. Inside the planet, Rose was sitting on a sofa made of code, with her legs crossed, sitting like a queen. Seeing Chen Tao coming, Rose's eyes lit up slightly, a smile appeared on her face, and she slowly stood up. Chen Tao took a look. In front of Rose was the surface of the planet that was bombed beyond recognition by an unknown force. In front of Rose, Feng Xiaoxiao, who was in tattered clothes, was lying on the ground. Feng Xiaoxiao's mouth was stained with blood, her eyebrows were frowned, her eyes were closed, and her chest was heaving, but a little weak. She looked a little painful. Seeing this, Chen Tao walked to Feng Xiaoxiao, raised his hand, and picked Feng Xiaoxiao up a little. He looked at Feng Xiaoxiao. Through the genetic function, Chen Tao could see that the genetic code that constituted Feng Xiaoxiao had begun to decrease, and she was not far from death. Chen Tao raised his hand and rewrote the lost code for her. "What's going on?" Chen Tao asked. Rose said, "I don't know either. She found me and said I was the Black Demon King and wanted to challenge me. I didn't intend to pay attention to her, but she insisted, so I took action, but I was a little heavy-handed." Chen Tao frowned slightly and looked at Feng Xiaoxiao. "This woman is really a challenge maniac." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 463. After Feng Xiaoxiao left Yongxiao Star, she wandered around the universe. While wandering, she not only heard about the number one person in the universe, Chen Tao, but she also heard about the former Dragon King, Katie, and the Black Demon King, Rose. After Feng Xiaoxiao challenged Chen Tao and was defeated by Chen Tao, she has been looking for her new goal. Although she has set the goal of defeating Chen Tao in the future, Feng Xiaoxiao knows very well that this goal is too far away. She could only choose to take it step by step. She originally planned to leave Earth Star to experience other civilizations and train herself. But when she was about to leave, she accidentally discovered that the Black Demon King Rose was also in the Earth Star. Surprised, Feng Xiaoxiao chose to challenge Rose as a test. 20 minutes before Chen Tao saw Feng Xiaoxiao in Rose's room. "Challenge me." Rose sat on the edge of the bed, wearing a thin black lace nightgown. She crossed her legs and looked at Feng Xiaoxiao, who was following her, and said, "I am not Chen Tao who will show mercy and fight with me. Maybe your life will be lost if you are not careful." Feng Xiaoxiao said lightly, "I don't need your pity. I just want to know where my limit is as the strongest Yongxiao star in this universe. You don't need to hold back when you fight me." As she said that, she raised her hand, and there was a silver-white longsword in her hand. The longsword was pointed at Rose. When Rose heard this, she said, "Okay, this is my lover's place. I don't want to destroy this place. Let's change places." With that said, Rose stood up and raised her hand. A dark wormhole appeared next to the two of them. Rose steps into the wormhole. Feng Xiaoxiao followed. Feng Xiaoxiao felt her eyes go dark and then light up, and she found that she had arrived at a desolate planet. The surface of this planet is all barren black soil. Rose programmed a sofa. She sat on the sofa minding her own business, crossed her legs, looked at Feng Xiaoxiao, and said with a smile, "Let's get started." Feng Xiaoxiao looked at Rose sitting on the sofa. She was slightly startled and said, "Is that all you do?" Rose was wearing a thin nightgown that fit her mature and proud figure. She was wearing a pair of red high heels, but there was nothing else. And Rose just sat like this, not looking like someone who wanted to fight at all. Feng Xiaoxiao frowned, "Look down on me." Feng Xiaoxiao snorted. She held the sword tightly in her hand, spread her wings behind her, and pounced towards Rose. Extremely fast. The wind rustles with anger. Rose didn't bring anything with her. She didn't even stand up and fight with Feng Xiaoxiao. It's so disrespectful. Suddenly, Feng Xiaoxiao's body became numb and unable to move. The body seemed to be frozen, and even the fingers could not move. The only thing that can move is her eyes. Feng Xiaoxiao looked surprised and suspicious. She wanted to ask, what did Rose do to her? But unfortunately she couldn't even open her mouth. Rose looked at Feng Xiaoxiao and said, "You may have misunderstood me. I don't mean to look down on you. However, when it comes to fighting at my level, it's not about using hands and feet. At my level, that's in high-tech competition, the more powerful the technology you master, the more you can take the initiative." Rose said calmly, "You may want to know why you can't move. I can explain to you that the reason why people can move is because the resistance of the air is low, and now I use my celestial computer to modify the surroundings of your body. The resistance increases by hundreds of millions of times. Facing such resistance, it is naturally impossible to move with your physical strength." She looked at Feng Xiaoxiao and said, "If you want to break through this resistance, the only way is to analyze the resistance next to it, but looking at it now, it seems you can't do it." Rose said, "I am Rose, the Black Demon King. Frankly speaking, I am tired of fighting. However, I know that if I don't teach you a lesson, you will probably challenge me again and again. I'm very annoying about this. So." Rose leaned on the sofa and put her palms together. She stared at Feng Xiaoxiao with squinted eyes and said, "I will teach you a lesson." As Rose finished speaking, a dark cloud appeared in the sky. Thunder and lightning flashed in the dark clouds. Rose said, "You used thunder and lightning as a weapon. This time I will use thunder and lightning as a gift in return. This is the gift I give you, so take it." Thunder and lightning suddenly gathered from the dark clouds in the sky, and then hit Feng Xiaoxiao. Bang! After a muffled sound, thunder and lightning fell again in the sky. Each thunderbolt is as thick as a bucket. Crazy bombardment of Feng Xiaoxiao's location. Dust was flying and thunder and lightning flashed, illuminating the surrounding area. Rose sat on the sofa expressionlessly, watching the scene indifferently. The thunder and lightning bombarded for 5 minutes. The thunder and lightning dispersed and the dark clouds also dispersed. The barren land in front of me became completely unrecognizable at this moment. On the ground, Feng Xiaoxiao's clothes were in tatters, lying on the ground with his eyes closed. Death is not far away. Seeing this, Rose raised her eyebrows and said, "Did you use too much force?" She stared at Feng Xiaoxiao and muttered to herself, "This guy is here to see my husband, and he can be regarded as my husband's guest. Isn't it bad to do this? Forget it, let's ask my husband." Other side. Feng Xiaoxiao was already confused. She is an invincible existence in Yungxiao star. Even in other civilizations, she can still fight against strong men from other civilizations. But since she came to Earth, she found herself so weak. First it was Chen Tao, then Betty, and then the Black Demon King Rose. She was no match for them. When those terrifying thunder and lightning fell, she was desperate. Feng Xiaoxiao's strength has always been her pride, the thing she is most proud of. She always thought that she was invincible in the world. She was indeed invincible in Yungxiao star. Even in the world outside Yungxiao star, she was also very powerful, and her self-confidence was inflated. But now the thing she is most confident in has been hit one after another. It turned out that she was so weak as an ant, and she would die if she was pinched. She was powerless and helpless, and she was desperate. She fell into a coma, and unknowingly, her consciousness slowly woke up. Once she woke up, she felt that she was in a warm embrace. The embrace was very wide and warm. The warmth made her linger. Her eyelashes moved, and she slowly opened her eyes, and she saw a face. It was a handsome face, and this person was Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked at her and said gently, "Are you okay?" Her eyes were a little confused. She looked at Chen Tao, and subconsciously raised her face. Chen Tao only felt his lips heat up, and he was stunned. What is she doing? My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 464. Parted lips. The confusion in Feng Xiaoxiu's eyes disappeared. She was startled slightly and her face turned red. She quickly stood up, came out of Chen Tao's arms, turned around, spread her wings, and flew up. Chen Tao looked at Feng Xiaoxiu's back. He was a little confused. What did this woman do just now? The question is, what does it mean that she ran away after kissing her? Feng Xiaoxiao was halfway through the flight when he suddenly frowned and subconsciously looked at the wings beside him, and saw that there was blood on the wings. Her face turned pale and her body suddenly fell down. She flapped her wings and struggled, but the injured wings were unable to support her as she flew into the sky. The body can only continue to fall. Chen Tao flew into the air, stretched out his hands, and hugged Feng Xiaoxiao into his arms. Feng Xiaoxiao was slightly startled. She raised her face and looked at Chen Tao. He was looking at her, eye to eye. Chen Tao's eyebrows relaxed slightly and he said, "Don't be so anxious, your injury is not fully healed yet." Feng Xiaoxiao looked at Chen Tao's face. Her cheeks turned slightly red. She turned her face and looked to the other side, not looking at Chen Tao. Look at her expression. Chen Tao pressed the button to ask her what she thought of the move just now. He could feel the warmth coming from the arm around her shoulders. That was the temperature of her blood. Chen Tao had just cleaned up the broken codes for her and rewritten them, but now they were only halfway through cleaning and writing. Her wings had not been completely repaired. If she forced to fly, the wounds would of course reopen. Chen Tao hugged Feng Xiaoxiao, then looked at Rose and said, "Rose, I'll take Feng Xiaoxiao back first." When Rose heard this, she hummed, "Okay." Chen Tao and Feng Xiaoxiao disappeared from Rose's sight. Rose looked at the backs of the two people as they left, her eyebrows slightly stretched, revealing a smile. Chen Tao took Feng Xiaoxiao back to base number 1. There were many rooms in base number 1. He randomly found an unoccupied room, carried Feng Xiaoxiao to the bedside, and placed her on the big bed. Feng Xiaoxiao slowly lay down and looked at Chen Tao with her big eyes. Eyes facing each other. Chen Tao looked at Feng Xiaoxiao's expression and said, "I need you to turn around so that I can heal your wings, and the soft armor on your body can be taken off." Feng Xiaoxiao looked at Chen Tao, adjusted her posture slightly, turned over and lay on the bed, her eyes closed. When Chen Tao saw Feng Xiaoxiao like this, he stopped talking and raised his hand. He directly analyzed the soft armor on Feng Xiaoxiao's body. As soon as the soft armor was analyzed, Chen Tao's heart beat faster when he saw the scene. Without the soft armor, she was left with only a black lace one-piece dress. Her back was turned to Chen Tao, and the fabric fit her proud figure due to gravity. Feng Xiaoxiao's skin is different from that of Earth Star people. She is white as gelatin. At the same time, there is no trace of impurities and no pores can be seen. Her hair is also white, a healthy white color, soft and shiny. The pair of wings behind her grew on her shoulder blades. Naturally, she was wearing an open back outfit, otherwise the wings would not be able to stretch out. It's just that her wings are now bloody and look a bit ferocious. Combined with her fair skin and proud figure, it's quite sad and beautiful. The beautiful scenery was ruined by the scarlet blood. This was not what Chen Tao wanted to see. In Chen Tao's view, everything in the world is made of code, and so is blood. Chen Tao touched the blood and recoated her wings. Chen Tao. Feng Xiaoxiao suddenly spoke. What's wrong?" Feng Xiaoxiao's eyes glowed with a strange light. She pursed her thin lips and said, "I already know the gap between you and me." Chen Tao said, "I'm very pleased, But what next? Do you still want to challenge me? For her, Chen Tao still had some headaches. This woman is so arrogant, as if there is nothing in the world that she cannot do. Chen Tao became a little depressed when he heard that Feng Xiaoxiao wanted to challenge him. Chen Tao wanted her to give up, but she didn't seem to give up at that time. Now after what happened to Rose, it would be good for her to know something. Feng Xiaoxiao said, I think it is impossible to defeat you. Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled. Chen Tao was very pleased that she had this knowledge. After all, he didn't want to fight this girl. Okay, Chen Tao said, now your body has been cured. He took back his hand and stood up. Suddenly, Chen Tao felt his wrist tighten. He was startled slightly, then looked at Feng Xiaoxiao. Feng Xiaoxiao was looking at Chen Tao, their eyes facing each other. Feng Xiaoxiao said, can you talk to me? Chen Tao looked at Feng Xiaoxiao. Feng Xiaoxiao was wearing thin clothes and looked like a sleeping beauty. Maybe even Sleeping Beauty can't compare to her natural beauty. Chen Tao sat down, looked at Feng Xiaoxiao, and said, what's wrong? Feng Xiaoxiao slowly retracted her wings, and the wings disappeared. She stood up lazily and sat in front of Chen Tao. She looked at Chen Tao with her big eyes, raised her arms like snow lotus roots, and put them around Chen Tao's neck. Close to Chen Tao. Their faces were very close. Eyes facing each other. Chen Tao could see her sapphire-like blue eyes and feel the body fragrance coming from her body. Her eyelashes were long and narrow, and down were her big eyes, and down from her high bridge of nose was a small, thin lip. When Chen Tao first saw this woman, he felt that she was a warrior, a cold warrior, with nothing in her eyes except fighting. And now, she, who had just been injured and healed, looked a little weak, just like water. She leaned close to Chen Tao, as if she had lost all her strength, and her whole body nestled in Chen Tao's arms. Xiao now leaned on Chen Tao's shoulder, and her arms were around Chen Tao's neck. She seemed to have lost her strength. Chen Tao subconsciously held her arm, and he looked at her. At such a close distance, Chen Tao could feel her body temperature, and he looked at her. She leaned lazily on Chen Tao's shoulder, closed her eyes, and said softly, I changed my target. Her voice was very light, as if it came from the clouds. Chen Tao's eyes fell on her beautiful and mature figure, and he said softly, what is your goal now? Feng Xiaoxiao opened her eyes and raised her head. She looked at Chen Tao, and the two faces were only 3 inches apart. She said, I need you. Chen Tao said slowly, have you returned to the goal you mentioned before? Before, she said that she would change her goal to pursue him. Feng Xiaoxiao said, it's different from before. Before, I just said it casually, but now I'm serious. When I was dying, when I needed someone the most, it was you who appeared by my side. She looked at Chen Tao seriously with her blue eyes and slowly moved closer. She kissed Chen Tao. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 465. The two faces slowly separated. Chen Tao looked at Feng Xiaoxiao. Feng Xiaoxiao's face was flushed, as if he had drunk wine. Her eyelashes trembled slightly, and she slowly opened her moving eyes. Eyes facing each other. There was a hint of confusion and moisture in her blue eyes. Chen Tao stretched out his hand. Feng Xiaoxiao was lying on the bed, looking at Chen Tao blankly. Chen Tao was directly above her. Eyes facing each other. Feng Xiaoxiao said, what do you want to do? Her voice was trembling. It could be seen that she was a little nervous. Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Feng Xiaoxiao and said, no woman can escape unscathed after scorning me. He looked at Feng Xiaoxiao, showed a wicked smile, and said, I want you to regret what you just did. Repent later. Feng Xiaoxiao's eyes were filled with confusion. Chen Tao held Feng Xiaoxiao's hand, looked at her expression, and said with a smile, you will know next. Time passed by in the bedroom. When Chen Tao brought Feng Xiaoxiao back, it was only that morning and the time was very fast. It was evening all of a sudden. After Chen Tao took a shower, he walked out of the bathroom in a bathrobe. He poured himself a glass of red wine, sat on the sofa, stood in front of the balcony, looked at the scenery outside, and took a sip of wine. After he relaxed, he re-entered the room. He glanced at the big bed. Feng Xiaoxiao was lying there, eyes closed, sleeping soundly. Chen Tao stopped disturbing her, walked to the sofa, sat down, picked up the remote control, and turned on the TV. Watching TV and drinking wine. About half an hour passed. Chen Tao heard the movement. He subconsciously looked at the bed and saw Feng Xiaoxiao sitting on the bed, looking at this side with tired eyes. Feng Xiaoxiao had just woken up, his hair was a little messy, and his expression looked tired and lazy. Seeing Chen Tao's azure eyes with a hint of brilliance, she pursed her thin lips, looked away, got out of bed, and walked to the bathroom. Looking at Feng Xiaoxiao's back, Chen Tao smiled. He looked away and ignored her. About 15 minutes passed. The bathroom door opened. Chen Tao looked and saw Feng Xiaoxiao, wrapped in a bath towel and with her hair tied, standing at the door of the bathroom. She looked here and then walked towards it. When she walked to the sofa, she sat down next to Chen Tao. She just sat upright, looking ahead and not speaking. Chen Tao turned his face sideways and looked at her. He smiled, raised his hand, put his arm around her waist, hugged her into his arms, and said with a smile, "Do you regret it?" She said, "I regret it, I definitely regret it." She turned her face sideways, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "You are not a human being." Chen Tao was startled and said with a smile, "Why am I not a human being?" Feng Xiaoxiao said, "Look what you just did." Looking at Feng Xiaoxiao's somewhat angry expression, Chen Tao gently put his arm around her shoulders, pinched her chin, and raised her face. He looked into her eyes and said with a smile, "This is an obligation as my woman." He leaned down and kissed her. Looking into her blurred eyes, he said, "It's too late to regret it now." She pursed her thin lips, slowly hid her face in her arms, and closed her eyes. "The moment I handed myself over to you, I knew that it was too late to regret it," she said leisurely, showing helplessness. She looked forward, her moving eyes under the long and narrow eyelashes glowing with moisture, and she said softly, "Be nice to me." Chen Tao looked at Feng Xiaoxiao beside him. At this moment, Feng Xiaoxiao didn't look like the first warrior of Yungxiao's star at all. Instead, she looked like a little woman, helpless and pitiful. Chen Tao raised his hand, put his arm around her shoulders, and pulled her into his arms. He got close to Feng Xiaoxiao's hair and kissed her. He said, "I promise to be good to you." Feng Xiaoxiao's heart warmed, and she slowly closed her eyes. Looking at Feng Xiaoxiao's obedient appearance, Chen Tao said, "Do you still want to become stronger now?" Feng Xiaoxiao's eyebrows stretched slightly, and she looked at Chen Tao, "Become stronger?" Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, "I told you that you are a second-generation genetic body. I can help you improve your genes and make you stronger." Feng Xiaoxiao shook her head, withdrew her gaze, and leaned her little head on Chen Tao's chest. She said, "Can I not be strong?" "Well, don't you want to become stronger?" Chen Tao was confused now. She suddenly didn't want to become stronger? Becoming stronger, isn't that what you want? Chen Tao looked at Feng Xiaoxiao. Feng Xiaoxiao said, "What I want has never been to become stronger." Chen Tao was startled. He looked at Feng Xiaoxiao strangely and said, "If you don't want to become stronger, then why do you keep looking for someone to challenge you?" Hearing this, Feng Xiaoxiao's eyes glowed with luster. She raised her face and looked at Chen Tao. "I am looking for someone to challenge me to find a man who can defeat me." Chen Tao was startled. Feng Xiaoxiao looked at Chen Tao and said, "Now that I have found it, you can find that man. However, at the beginning, I did not intend to hand myself over to you. Then unconsciously, I wanted to relax and rely on you for a while, but who knew, you." Feng Xiaoxiao said, "I didn't plan to give myself to you so quickly." Chen Tao looked into her eyes, he smiled, moved closer to her, and kissed her. She hid her face in Chen Tao's arms obediently. "I don't want anything, as long as you treat me well, I will be happy." Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled, "Okay." Chen Tao accompanied her and enjoyed this rare warmth. After a while, Chen Tao found that the girl in his arms breathed slowly. He looked back and found that she had fallen asleep. So sleepy? That's right, she was tired all day, but she woke up after sleeping for a short time. No wonder she was sleepy. But why did she wake up so quickly? Was she worried that he would run away? Thinking of this, Chen Tao couldn't help but smile. Chen Tao didn't think much about it, picked her up and put her on the bed. Looking at Feng Xiaoxiao lying on the bed, this woman has a proud figure and looks beautiful. With the flawless skin color like white porcelain, she is like a work of art carefully carved by an artist, beautiful and flawless. She is here. Chen Tao still dare not stay any longer, lest he can't control himself and disturb her. Chen Tao got up and left. Chen Tao had just left and the door had just closed. Feeling the movement, Feng Xiaoxiao slowly opened her eyes. She lazily looked at the door that was slowly closing. She saw Chen Tao's figure in the gap of the door that had not yet closed. Did he go out? Feng Xiaoxiao slowly closed her eyes. So sleepy. Since Feng Xiaoxiao's genes were upgraded to the second generation of genes, she could not eat or drink, nor sleep, and she would not be sleepy. However, Feng Xiaoxiao still felt very sleepy and tired. Is it because of that man? Probably. But Feng Xiaoxiao didn't think much about it. If she was sleepy, she would just take a rest. In fact, she didn't know that it was Chen Tao who changed her genetic structure and made her have the living habits of ordinary people. Although it was okay for her not to sleep, she would still feel tired and sleepy. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 466. Chen Tao came to the lobby of base number 1. In the hall, He Yuxuan, wearing a white shirt, was sitting on the sofa watching TV and chasing dramas. Noticing the movement here, He Yuxuan looked here subconsciously. Eyes facing each other. He Yuxuan smiled and said, "Dear." Chen Tao walked to He Yuxuan and sat down. "Where are the others?" He Yuxuan said, "The others went shopping in Dixing." "Shopping," Chen Tao said, "can't you use programming?" He Yuxuan gave Chen Tao a roll of her eyes. She showed a playful smile and said, "If everything is programmed, wouldn't life be meaningless? You said this yourself, and now people are still using programming." Chen Tao said, "Yes. Girls like to shop and have nothing to do, so it is also a good thing to let them do some activities outside." He looked around and said, "What about Betty? I remember that guy doesn't seem to like shopping." He Yuxuan crossed her chest with her hands. She raised her fair and slender leg and placed it on the other leg. She leaned on the sofa and said with a smile, "Guess." Chen Tao looked at He Yuxuan. In addition to a white shirt, He Yuxuan also wears black fishnet pantyhose and a pair of red high-heeled boots. Matching her fair skin and slender figure, this is a rare beauty in front of her. Chen Tao smiled and said, "In the room." He Yuxuan shook her head and said with a smile, "Guess again." Since Betty followed Chen Tao, she doesn't like to walk around much. If not in the room, there is one place where she hangs out most often. Chen Tao said, "Canteen." Apart from her own room, her favorite place is the dining hall. In the dining hall, artificial people can prepare steaks of various flavors for her. The dining hall is her favorite place. A girl like Betty, although she is petite and cute, but because of her special genes, she will never gain weight no matter how much she eats. Hyukshuan shook her head again and said with a smile, "Not in the dining hall, but your answer is already very close. Not in the room or in the dining hall." Chen Tao looked at Hyukshuan, which made him a little confused. "Close." Chen Tao said, "Did she go to the restaurant?" Hyukshuan smiled and shook her head. Seeing this, Chen Tao thought for a moment, smiled and said, "Okay, stop being so pretentious, where is that girl?" Hyukshuan smiled and said, "Kitchen." This answer made Chen Tao slightly startled. Kitchen? Betty went to the kitchen? What was she doing in the kitchen? Chen Tao couldn't help but be very curious. Hyukshuan said, "If you go to the kitchen, what can you do?" "Of course, cook." Chen Tao's eyes widened. "Cooking, Betty cooking." Chen Tao couldn't help scratching the back of his head with his hand, and said, "Why did she suddenly go to cook?" Hyukshuan said with a smile, "I don't know about this. You can ask her yourself. Asking her will definitely be more useful than asking me." Chen Tao stood up slightly and said, "I'll go to the kitchen to have a look." Betty didn't know what she suddenly thought of, why she suddenly wanted to cook. Gotta check it out. Thinking of this, Chen Tao walked towards the kitchen. "Come to the kitchen." He looked at the kitchen scene and was slightly startled. Sure enough, Betty was in the kitchen. She stood in front of the kitchen counter. There was a steak in front of her. The steak was placed on the iron plate, making a sizzling sound. The kitchen counter seemed a bit high, so Betty had to stand on a small wooden chair to rest her feet if she wanted to reach it. She was wearing a white shirt, a thin shirt that fit her slender figure, and her skin was as fair as jade. The long red hair before has now become ink-like black hair, soft and healthy. Her hair was tied into a pair of ponytails, naturally exposing her slender white neck. She was facing away from Chen Tao. From this angle, Chen Tao could see her slender back. The slender Betty is like a work of art carefully carved by an artist. Just the back view is enough to attract the attention of others and make them unable to look away. Chen Tao slowly walked over and approached Betty. Even if Betty was standing on the small wooden chair, her petite height could not reach Chen Tao's chest. Chen Tao raised his hand and slowly hugged Betty's slender waist. Betty stiffened slightly. Chen Tao moved closer to Betty, buried his head in her neck, and greedily smelled her fragrance. It was a lily-like fragrance, light and fragrant. "Stop it!" Betty's cheeks flushed and she said, "I'm making something." She was indeed making something. If Chen Tao was so close, he could see the steak that Betty had placed on the iron plate. Chen Tao looked at the steak and then at Betty's profile. Betty has a beautiful little face, long and narrow eyelashes, big eyes, and cherry-like thin lips, which is very beautiful. She was looking at the steak in front of her seriously, and her serious look made Chen Tao couldn't help but move closer to Betty's cheek and give her a kiss. Betty's face turned red. "Stop making trouble." She refused with her mouth, and pressed the steak with a small shovel in her small hand. After looking at Betty's movements, Chen Tao smiled, stretched out his hand, and held the small shovel in his big hand. Of course, there was a small hand between the big hand and the shovel. Her small hand was wrapped in Chen Tao's big hand. Betty looked at her little hands, she pursed her thin lips, then turned her face to look at Chen Tao. "What do you want to do?" On this side of her face, the distance between their faces was very, very close. Chen Tao looked into her eyes, his eyes fell on her thin lips, and he came closer. A small kiss. Parted lips. Betty's eyelashes trembled slightly, and her pair of ink-black eyes matched with the whites of her eyes were a pair of clear and perfect eyes. So beautiful. Betty retracted her horns and wings, and changed her own hair and eyes to earthling black hair. The black hair color matches her skin color, which is as white as cream, and matches her slender figure. She is breathtakingly beautiful now. This little loli. Chen Tao looked into her eyes and said with a smile, "You know what I'm going to do." Betty's face turned red, she looked away and said, "Wait a minute, I'll fry the steak first. After it's done, we'll talk about what you want to do." Seeing Betty's well-behaved appearance, Chen Tao smiled, "Okay." It's rare for Betty to think about cooking by herself. Although Chen Tao's heart felt like being scratched by a cat after seeing Betty, he felt itchy and a little uneasy, but he couldn't interrupt her cooking, otherwise the steak would be wasted. Chen Tao kissed her cheek again, and then reluctantly let go. He walked to the kitchen door, folded his hands on his chest, leaned against the door, looked at Betty's beautiful figure, and slowly admired it. Why did she turn her hair and eyes black? Although Chen Tao was curious, he didn't ask for the time being and just waited quietly. I thought I could have a good chat with her later. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 467. Betty was busy for about 10 minutes. She placed the steak on the dinner plate and got down from the small wooden chair. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "It's done, let's go to the dining hall." Upon hearing this, Chen Tao smiled and said, "Go to the bedroom." Betty was slightly startled, her little face turned pink, and she said, "Yeah. Here, give me the dinner plate." Chen Tao stretched out his hand and took the dinner plate from Betty's hand. This dinner plate is still a bit big for Betty. Chen Tao couldn't bear to watch her take it to the bedroom. The two came to the bedroom. Chen Tao's bedroom is very big and has basically everything. Chen Tao sat on the sofa and placed the dinner plate on the table. He held Betty's little hand. Betty came over obediently and snuggled into Chen Tao's arms. She sat down, then opened the lid of the dinner plate, picked up the juice and poured it on the beef. Suddenly the aroma comes to you. Smell the aroma. Betty's eyes lit up slightly, she picked up the cutlery and started cutting the steak. Seeing Betty's actions, he smiled and said nothing. Betty cut off a piece of beef. She did not eat it herself, but brought the beef to Chen Tao's mouth. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Come on, try it." Hearing this, Chen Tao blinked, opened his mouth and took a bite. "It tastes pretty good, just a bit woody." "How is it?" Betty looked at Chen Tao with expectation. Chen Tao smiled and said, "It's delicious." Betty's eyes lit up slightly, and a smile appeared on her little face, and she said, "Really? Don't lie to me." Chen Tao put his arms around her slender waist, came close to her face, kissed her, and said with a smile, "The steak is delicious, and so are you." "They are all delicious." Betty blushed, looked away, ignored him, and cut herself a bite and put it in her mouth. She took a bite, pursed her thin lips, and said, "It's a bit woody, it doesn't feel that delicious." It failed again. Failed again, Chen Tao looked at Betty and said with a smile, "Have you done it many times?" Betty hummed, "I learned this half a month ago, but it's really difficult. I've done it many times, and I never succeeded. It doesn't taste good." Chen Tao stroked Betty's hair and said, "Why would you want to do it yourself? Wouldn't it be nice for someone else to do it for you?" Betty said, "Of course it's not good. What if I want to eat it when they are no longer with us?" She raised her face, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "So, I think I have to learn it." Upon hearing this, looking at Betty's cute face, Chen Tao said, "Actually, you are already a good chef." "A good chef?" Betty turned her face and looked at Chen Tao, her eyes filled with confusion. "Am I a chef? I remember that I only cook steaks, and I have eaten every steak I have cooked. It doesn't even taste good. How can you say that I am a good cook?" Betty looked confused. Chen Tao looked at the cute little face in front of him. He looked at Betty, smiled and said, "No, in addition to steak, you also made a delicious dish." Betty looked at Chen Tao, "What kind of food?" She looked confused. Chen Tao smiled and said, "You made a delicious dish called Betty." Betty was startled, her eyes filled with doubts, and she still didn't quite understand. Chen Tao came close to Betty, smelled her unique aroma, and said softly, "In my eyes, you are the most delicious and delicious delicacy. It is infinitely more delicious than the steak made by Cuddy." Betty now knew what he was talking about. Two flashes of red clouded her face. She rolled her eyes at Chen Tao and looked away. "I'm not interested in talking nonsense." Chen Tao smiled and said, "Isn't it? But in my opinion, you are the most delicious food." Betty's face turned red. "Pervert, pervert speaks." Chen Tao smiled cheerfully, raised his hand, and hugged Betty into his arms. Betty struggled in Chen Tao's arms and said with a blushing face, "Don't make trouble, I haven't finished the steak yet." He didn't say anything, put Betty on the bed, and looked at Betty's face. Eyes facing each other. Betty's big moving eyes were filled with watery mist. He looked into her eyes and said softly, "Put down the steak first. Now it's time for me to taste the delicious food." Betty blushed and stopped talking. Chen Tao lowered his face. Betty watched the man's face getting closer and closer. Her little hands lowered Chen Tao's chest, but seeing him getting closer, she could only passively close her eyes. Other side. Inside Xia Yaxing. Half a month has passed since Chen Tao came out to stabilize the battle situation. As the leader of the Mori kingdom, Kinja is sitting at her desk, wearing white gloves, looking at the information on the monitor, her eyebrows slightly wrinkled, her expression serious. At this time, the door opened. Jin Na held the information bag and walked in from the door. She looked at Kinja, walked over and said to Kinja, "The king." Kinja didn't even look at Jin Na and said calmly, "What's wrong?" Jin Na said, "Someone wants to see you, the leader of the country." Qingya was slightly startled. She slowly withdrew her eyes from the mouse and the monitor. She crossed her arms across her chest, looked at Jin Na, and said, "Who?" Jin Na looked at Qingya and said, "Marta, the lord of the Western Kingdom." Qingya said, "That young princess, is she here?" She looked a little surprised. Jinna nodded seriously and said, "Yes." Kinja said, "How many people?" "One, she came alone." Jinna looked at Kinja. Kinja frowned, "She came alone, and dared to come to us. I remember that according to my intelligence, she should be just a little girl. It was only with the help of Bias that she could sit in the position of the head of the country until now. Now Bias is gone, I didn't expect that she could still move." Kinja thought for a while, then looked at Jinna and said, "Where is she now?" Jinna said, "Waiting in the reception room." Kinja nodded slightly. She stood up and said, "The road from the west to here is not short, let's go see her." In the reception room, Marta was wearing a black robe and sitting on the sofa. She looked a little nervous, and her big eyes looked here and there. She slowly retracted her gaze and bit her thin lips. This was the first time she left the West alone and ran to another country. It was inevitable that she would still be a little nervous. At this time, Kinja walked in from outside. Kinja entered the reception room and looked at Marta as she walked. Marta was wearing a black robe, which hid her figure and only revealed her face. Marta's face looked like that of a little girl, with long pink hair tied up. Although Kinja had seen Marta through photos before, she couldn't help but frown when she saw Marta in person. She was too young. The ruler of the Western country could be such a young girl. This surprised Kinja and gave her a headache. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 468. What troubles Qingya is that the leader of the Western Kingdom is so young, so it's no wonder she needs Bias to help her. It's no wonder that after Bias's incident, she immediately sent people to use nuclear warheads on Tinner Island in the Fire Nation. It's a stupid idea to use nuclear warheads so casually. It can be seen that the current leader of the Western Kingdom in front of him is a stupid person, and now if Kinja is asked to talk to this stupid leader of the Western Kingdom, what will be the result? Although Kinja felt a headache, she had no choice but to sit on the sofa opposite Marta. She crossed her legs, clasped her hands, looked at Marta and said, "My people didn't neglect you, did they?" Marta adjusted her mood. She looked at Kinja and said, "Well, they are quite polite." Qingya nodded slightly and said, "Then the Lord of the Western Kingdom came to my place." "What's the matter?" Marta looked at Kinja and said, "I want to cooperate with you." "Cooperation?" Kinja looked at Marta. Kinja put her hands on the chair, looked at Marta, thought for a moment, and said, "What about cooperation?" Marta said, "Now there are connections between countries all over the world. Our country and your country also have various commercial connections. I plan to strengthen some cooperation and military cooperation. I want Sen to become our country military allies." "Are you an ally?" Kinja looked at Marta and said, "The Western country and the Fire country are very close to each other. You two countries have always had conflicts on the border. And half a month ago, you were in the Fire country. The country dropped a nuclear bomb, and the Fire country responded with a nuclear bomb. The conflict between you has escalated to a new level. Although there has been no further action between the two of you in the past half-month." Kinja looked at Marta and said, "Now that Lassen is standing aside, is this your next move?" She continued, "There are a total of 9 countries in the world, among which the Fire country, the West country and our country can be regarded as the 3 major powers. Currently, 3 countries support the Fire country, the other 3 countries support you, the West country, and only our country remains neutral. Now you want to win over our country. If our country stands on your side, then 4 countries will support your country, and the other 4 countries, including the Fire country, will be at a disadvantage." Kinja looked at Marta. "I see that you are not very old, but I didn't expect you to be so scheming. Let me tell you frankly, our country of Sen is always neutral. It is neutral now and will be neutral in the future. Our country of Sen has always been based on peace. Basically, we can't help you deal with the Fire Nation." Marta was startled. She looked at Kinja and said, "No. No." Kinja looked at Marta, squinted her eyes, and said, "How do you say that?" Marta looked at Kinja seriously and said, "I don't want a war." Kinja was startled. She looked at Marta's serious little face, her eyebrows furrowed, and she said, "Your brother, Bias, was killed, and the Fire Nation used nuclear bombs against your country, causing countless deaths in your country, tens of millions of people. And you, dropped 3 nuclear bombs on Tinger Island, killing tens of millions of people. You were the first to use the nuclear bombs. Now you tell me that you don't want war?" Kinja looked at Marta and said, "Do you think I believe it?" Marta put her hands on her legs. She held the black robe fabric on her legs tightly with her hands. Her eyes were filled with luster. She looked at Kinja and said, "Before, I was stupid. I heard after Bias was killed on Tinner Island, my head was burning and I wanted to kill everyone in the Fire Nation to avenge Bias. But after I saw that purgatory-like scene, I knew I was wrong." Marta looked at Kinja seriously. She said, "Although those people are from the Fire Nation, they are also flesh and blood. Follow me. The same as Bias, but they died because of my order. I was so stupid, I was guilty." Marta lowered her head, her face turned pale, and she looked painful. Looking at Marta's expression, Kinja was slightly startled, and she frowned. Kinja said slowly, "It seems that you have grown up." Marta was startled and looked at Kinja. "Grow up?" Qingya said, "Children's perception is that they think the world is centered around them and revolves around them. When they mature, they find that the world does not revolve around them alone. There were others like himself. And you seem to have matured and realized that the world does not revolve around you alone. In this case, you, who understand your own stupidity, are qualified to talk to me. Qingya looked at the girl in front of her and said, "Tell me, what do you mean by cooperation?" The girl in front of her was not stupid enough to drag Mori country to fight against Fire country. With this prerequisite, Kinja could continue the discussion. Marta looked at Kinja and said, "What I mean by military cooperation is that we become friendly countries." She looked at Qingya and said, "If our country is threatened, I hope you can provide assistance. If your country is threatened, our country will also provide assistance to your country. In this way, we can have military ties, but this kind of cooperation does not mean that I need you to fight against the Fire Nation. As you know, our country used nuclear bombs against the Fire Nation, and the Fire Nation also used nuclear bombs against our country." Marta looked at Kinja seriously and said, "This time our Fire Nation was bombed. It's our country's fault. I will not take any military action against the Fire Nation. I will let our country defend itself. We will not be the invaders." Qingya nodded slightly and said, "I understand what you mean. What do you mean is for our country to have a friendly relationship with your country and to defend against foreign enemies together." Martin nodded. She looked at Kinja and said, "The Fire country, the Western country and the Forest country are all neighboring countries and have territorial borders with each other. If the Fire country annexes our country, then your country will also be affected by it. The threat from the Fire Nation, I feel bad about this." Qingya showed a smile. "Well, you impressed me. Before, I thought that there was only one bias in the Western Kingdom who could be considered a figure, but I didn't expect that you, Mata, are not stupid after all." "But..." Kinja's smile faded. She looked at Marta and said, "I reject your proposal. You and the Fire Nation seem to be in balance now, but secretly there are constant conflicts, and there is a possibility of conflict at any time. It is impossible to be friendly to either of the two countries at this time. This is a sensitive moment, and you should be aware of the ripple effects that will occur if our country moves." Qingya said, "This proposal of yours should wait until the relationship between you and the Fire Nation stabilizes." Qingya said, "Jin Na, see the guests off." Marta was startled. She stood up, opened her mouth, wanted to say something, but couldn't help but slowly closed her mouth, because she knew very well that Kinja would not change her mind. Marta was a little helpless, but she had no choice but to leave. Marta left Kinja's castle, put on a black robe hat, hid her face in the black robe, and got into a car on the street. The car started. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 469. Marta sat in the car and took off the hat from her black robe, revealing her little face. She turned her face and looked outside through the car window. Negotiations were fruitless. This was unexpected by Marta. She knew that Kinja would not agree so easily, let alone under such circumstances. Although this was expected by Marta, she still felt a little disappointed. The car drove slowly. What Marta didn't know was that someone was already ambushing her on the way to her car. In a room in a hotel. A man dressed in black stood at the window, holding a black sniper rifle. He held a sniper rifle in his hand, with the muzzle of the gun sticking out of the window. Facing the window, he stared at the road below through the scope and looked at the passing vehicles in the distance. "Sheep, at the speed of Marta's car, we will reach the sniper point in about 5 minutes," the intercom rang. Hearing this voice, the man codenamed Shepherd said calmly, "I understand. Wang is his code as a killer. Wang has no name. He is an orphan who was adopted since birth. He has no name, only a code. Everything about him comes from the company. It can be said that he has nothing. The only thing that belongs to him is his mission and goals. All he needs to live is to receive tasks and complete them. As for who the target is and what he does, it has nothing to do with him. At this time, Marta's car appeared in Shepard's field of vision. Shepard squinted his eyes, looked through the scope, and locked the sniper rifle on Marta's head. He pressed his finger on the trigger of the sniper rifle and pulled it sharply. Bang, accompanied by a gunshot. The bullet flew out and hit Marta. The speed of the bullet is extremely fast, in an instant. The windshield of Marta's car shattered, and the bullet passed through the driver in an instant and continued back. The bullet penetrated directly into Marta's head. The car lost the driver's control and instantly skidded. Zitzise. The steering wheel slipped. The entire car jumped off the runway in an instant. Bang, with a muffled sound, the car hit the wall and the wall dented. The front of the car was shattered by the impact. Shepard looked at the scene in front of him, looking through the scope at Marta, who was slumped in the back seat of the car, her eyes closed, her face covered in blood. Wang said into the intercom, "Mission accomplished." He put away the sniper rifle, packed it up, and left. Just then, inside the dilapidated car, Marta sat slumped in the back seat of the car, leaning against the seat with her face raised. Only a red hole could be seen on Marta's forehead, and blood was flowing out along the hole. After a while, her little face was covered with blood. Already full of blood. However, at this moment, something strange happened. A bullet was pushed out of the bullet hole in Marta's forehead by an invisible force. You can see the blood on Marta's face starting to flow backwards. Returning to her wound at a speed visible to the naked eye, the bullet hole in her forehead shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. After a while, Marta regained consciousness and opened her eyes. There was confusion in her pink eyes. She looked around and found that she was in the car. The car was in a mess and the driver was dead. Seeing this, Marta subconsciously touched her forehead. She just clearly felt that her forehead was hit by a bullet, and the pain and fear were still surrounding her heart. But when he touched it with his hand, he found that there was no wound at all on his forehead. Marta was full of doubts, and she didn't think much more about it. Suddenly, Marta smelled a strong smell of gasoline. At the same time as she smelled this smell, Marta also heard the sound of something dripping to the ground. Gasoline. She raised her face and saw flames coming from the front of the car. Seeing the flames, Marta felt an inexplicable sense of fear welling up in her heart. She quickly opened the door and ran out of the car. But as soon as she opened the door and got out of the car, she hadn't walked 2 meters. Boom! Accompanied by a loud bang. Marta only had time to look back. She saw the car explode, and at the same time she saw a scorching flame roaring towards her like a beast. Seeing the flames in front of her, Marta's pupils were filled with fear and despair. The flames caused by the car explosion soared into the sky. The flames covered everything within 5 meters, engulfing everything nearby. 3 minutes ago. Inside base number 1 of Earth Star. Chen Tao was sitting on the sofa in the living room, watching TV with Zi Cheng. Chen Tao gently held Zi Cheng's shoulders, and half of Zi Cheng's body was nestled in Chen Tao's arms. Zi Cheng looked at the TV, then raised her face and looked at Chen Tao beside her. Her eyes were shining with a hint of luster, and there was a smile on her face. She withdrew her gaze and snuggled into Chen Tao's arms, enjoying the rare tenderness. Chen Tao lowered his head and looked at Zi Cheng. Seeing Zi Cheng's comfortable look, he smiled and gently touched her shoulders to comfort her. He looked away. Suddenly, a voice sounded in Chen Tao's mind. Marta's emergency protection system has been triggered. A mechanical voice sounded in Chen Tao's mind. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao frowned slightly. Marta is the pink little girl that Chen Tao met on Sia Star before. Marta is really pink, with pink hair and eyes. In order to prevent a nuclear war from happening on Sia where Marta is, Chen Tao specially chatted with Marta and Sun Hao, which prevented the impending nuclear war. In order to prevent the West Country and the Fire Country from fighting again, Chen Tao specially set up an emergency protection device on Marta, the purpose of which is to protect Marta. Whether it is Marta or Sun Hao, if one of them gets into trouble during this sensitive period, then the West Country and the Fire Country will inevitably fight again. In order to avoid this situation, Chen Tao got an emergency protection device for Marta, but he didn't get one for Sun Hao. Sun Hao is a smart man, and if something goes wrong, it can only be Marta. Of course, Chen Tao didn't think he would use this device, and that device was just to prevent any accidents. But Chen Tao never expected that it would be triggered by someone not long after. Chen Tao stood up. When Chen Tao stood up, Ziking looked at Chen Tao and said, "What's wrong?" Her eyes were full of doubt. Chen Tao raised his hand, stroked Ziking's hair, and said, "I have something to do, I have to go out." Ziking sat up obediently, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "Well." Chen Tao's figure disappeared on the spot. Inside Xia Yaxing, the flames engulfed Marta in panic. The imagined burning sensation did not come. But she could feel a warmth. Marta slowly opened her eyes, and when she came to her senses, she was surprised to find that she was being held in the arms of a man, and she was being held in the arms of a man like a princess. Chen Tao looked at Marta and said, "Are you okay? My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 470. Marta was stunned. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Why are you here?" She looked around subconsciously, and then she found that she was in mid-air. She looked at Chen Tao, and then she noticed that a pair of pure white wings were slowly flapping behind Chen Tao. Marta's eyes trembled slightly. She looked at Chen Tao, and her rose-colored eyes trembled slightly, with a hint of disbelief in them. Marta looked at Chen Tao and said, "You are indeed a god." At the same time, Shepard had just come out of the hotel door. As soon as he came out, he noticed that the people next to him were looking up. Shepard could hear discussions. "What is that? That man has wings, is he a god? He seems to be holding a girl in his arms." Hearing the discussions next to him, Shepard's eyebrows stretched slightly, he raised his face, and looked up. At a glance, Shepard also saw the man with wings, and at the same time saw the girl in the man's arms. Seeing the girl, Muang's pupils condensed slightly, and his pupils trembled. How is it possible? The girl in the man's arms looked so familiar. Since Muang received the task and got the girl's photo half a month ago, he nailed the photo on the wall and stared at it every day. The girl in the man's arms was Muang's target this time, Marta, the ruler of the Western Kingdom. Just now, Muang shot the girl's forehead with a sniper rifle. But now Muang found that the girl in the man's arms was not injured at all. This scene was too strange. Muang's eyes trembled slightly, he stared at Chen Tao, and said to himself, "Is it because of that man?" Realizing this, Muang touched the black bag with a sniper rifle hanging on his body. Muang looked back at the hotel behind him, he retracted his sight and left. Just now, he fired a gun in this hotel, and the guards of the Sen country will definitely arrive in a while, and he can't stay here any longer. Must run. Anyway, we have to go. He got into the black car and drove away. Chen Tao subconsciously glanced at the black car that was slowly moving away below. He retracted his gaze, looked at Marta, and said, "I'll take you back first." Martin nodded slightly. Chen Tao and Marta's figures disappeared together. When they appeared again, the surrounding environment changed again. Marta looked around and was surprised to find that the surroundings had also become her bedroom. Chen Tao put Marta on the bed. Marta sat on the edge of the bed, looked around, then looked at Chen Tao and said, "Is this, My bedroom. Chen Tao said, well, you stay here for a while, I'll leave. As he said that, he disappeared without waiting for Marta to say anything. Marta looked at the empty bedroom, she got up and looked around. My bedroom, this is actually in my bedroom. Marta felt a strong sense of unreality, this feeling was too strange. You should know that Marta's room is in the capital of the West Country, and just a second ago, Marta was in the capital of the Forest Country. The distance between the two cities is not short. Even if you take a plane, it will take half a day. But in the blink of an eye, such a long distance has been crossed. This is something Marta can't imagine. This is completely beyond her common sense. Suddenly, Marta subconsciously touched her forehead with her hand. She was shot here just now. The feeling was very clear. She was definitely not dreaming, but she didn't die. No wonder it's because of him. Marta looked at the scenery on the balcony and said to herself, can he resurrect the dead? God, is this the power of God? At the same time, Wang drove away, and now he is on the road to escape. As a killer, Wang knows very well that after sniping in a place, he must leave that place immediately. Otherwise, he will be discovered. If the killer is discovered, it means that his life is in danger. So, even if he sees that the target survives strangely, he can only choose to run. The car was halfway on the road when Wang suddenly saw a figure in front of him. It was a man with white wings. The man was flying in the air. He slowly landed in front of the road, staring at Wang with a pair of eyes. Wang's face sank slightly. He saw someone in front of him, but he did not stop the car. Instead, he stepped on the accelerator to the bottom. The speedometer on the car instantly soared to the limit. The car shot towards the man in the distance like an arrow from a string. The man was Chen Tao, watching the car coming towards him. Chen Tao stood there without dodging. The car was about to hit Chen Tao. Wang suddenly opened the door, and he suddenly jumped out of the car, and now the car was driving on the suspension bridge. When Wang jumped out, his body fell from the suspension bridge, and below was the sea. At the moment Wang fell, Wang saw that the car hit Chen Tao. Bang! Accompanied by the sound of explosion, flames shot up from the suspension bridge. In an instant, flames shot up to the sky. Shepard looked at the flames and squinted his eyes. Then his body fell into the sea, and the water splashed for a while. After Wang's body sank into the sea, he relied on his swimming skills to start swimming and quickly swam towards the shore. I swam for about 15 minutes. The shepherd came ashore. As soon as they landed, Shepard heard a sound. The sea water is very salty. When the shepherd heard the sound, he felt excited. He stood up and looked at the source of the sound. Over there, a man stood with his hands folded on his chest, looking at the shepherd indifferently. That man was Chen Tao, who had just been hit by Wang's car. Chen Tao didn't have any injuries on his body and looked calm. Wang hurriedly pulled out the pistol from his waist and pointed it at Chen Tao. Bang bang. 2 gunshots rang out, bullets emerged from the muzzle and shot towards Chen Tao. Chen Tao raised his hand. Caught 2 bullets with one hand. He opened his hand, and the 2 twisted bullets fell to the concrete floor with 2 soft sounds. Wang's face changed, and he looked at Chen Tao with trembling pupils. You, who are you? Chen Tao looked at Wang and said, I should ask you this question, right? Who are you? Why did you attack that woman? The one who has conflicts with the Western Kingdom now is the Fire Nation. Could the person in front of him be a killer sent by the Fire Nation? Could it be sent by Sun Hao? Chen Tao needs to know this. Wang frowned suddenly, raised his hand, and pointed the pistol at his head. Bang! There was a gunshot. The shepherd fell to the ground and became motionless. Looking at the shepherd who had turned into a corpse, Chen Tao's eyebrows slightly stretched and he said, you really have the bearing of a killer, but you still have to answer the answer I want to know, even if you commit suicide.